Gashbar asks, what would you say is the most complicated deck to pilot? And do you think that playing a more risk, higher reward deck is better compared to some safer combo to win?
I think the most complicated deck to pilot in any regards right now, in cEDH especially, would be Storm or Eggs, where you don't really know how you're going to get there, but you know what your end goal is.
I think we're probably talking about some kind of a Storm deck. I don't think that Storm decks are necessarily the most effective. In fact, I often refer to it as the JVP High Tide problem. You definitely know when you can start going off, but you don't necessarily know if going off is going to result in a win. That being said, I think Storm decks have probably some of the most complicated lines in terms of sequencing, because you don't necessarily have a guarantee that there's going to be a payoff at the end of what you're doing.
I actually find Xur has quite a lot of quirky interactions that you have to play around, especially in our meta. It's very mid-range, so it's not very often that I just turn 3 Xur into Necropotence, draw my deck, and win the next turn, because somebody usually interacts at some point, so depending how many cards you draw, when, and what cards they even are, you know, you gotta find your lines while weaving around everybody else.
So you just try to keep putting the pieces together until you finish the puzzle and kill everybody with Aetherflux Reservoir.
I would say in terms of risk versus reward, playing the more difficult deck is a lot more satisfying, at least. If you play an easy to win combo deck, then your lines are fairly similar. You start to see a lot of the same patterns and you can get really burnt out on that sort of thing. But with a more complicated deck, you can almost experience it new each time you want to win, when you have to piece together lines or you have to fight through people trying to stop you or something similar. So I would say I would prefer the harder to play deck over an easier deck.
Whether I would rather play a more complicated deck or a safer deck, I would definitely rather play a more complicated deck. The puzzle solving, the problem solving aspect of cEDH is definitely what draws me to the format.
If you see any of my list, it's all risk, no reward. I'll take added risk just for the fun of it. I like playing the lottery, who knows?
Making your plan high risk, high reward, I don't think there's much to that. If the combo works, it's gonna work, and if not, play more counter spells.
Hucka asks, as it wasn't answered last time, is Bill single?
No.
I'm pretty sure this was answered last time, was it not?
No.
Yes, because the plural would be bills. Tell people stop asking that question. It's gonna be my answer.
I am not single. I have a girlfriend. Her name is Riley. She is a nurse and she's wonderful and she feeds the spike feeders.
Hucka asks, how many Indiana Jones movies exist?
I think there's 8 now, but I'm pretty positive they've gone downhill. I saw Crystal Skull, wasn't so great. And I don't know if there's any after Crystal Skull.
Oh, at this point we're at 10, 11, 11, 11, 11.
3.
3, and if you have a different opinion, fight me.
5?
Hucka inquires, do you own all the cards you show on camera, or are some of those proxies?
In my main cEDH decks that you've seen play, I own all the cards. In the decks where they're clearly one-offs, I do not own all those cards.
Some of the cards that we show on camera actually are proxies, but we own them. Few of us use a proxy binder system. If you're interested, I've got a link in the comments to an article that I wrote about it. They're still obviously fake cards, so they would never be able to be sold because they're just printed on regular printer paper. Now, occasionally we'll play a one-off deck that might involve a card or two that we've never owned.
Between all of us, we own 98 to 99% of the cards we play.
All of the cards that we show on camera, I personally own at least 1 copy of. You can quote me on that.
We all have quite extensive collections. You can kind of see with Bill and with Elliot, they love to like bling out their decks and get great cards, and it's something we all do. But we do end up playing some one-off decks and just like play testing and trying out. And a good example of a card that's pretty expensive to pick up, from what was going to be originally a one-off, is Field of Dreams. It's about 150 US right now, could have gone up. And that's pretty pricey for a 1-mana see the top card of your library effect. We make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on. Like, we don't try to trick anyone when we're playing. If anyone asks or it is a big deal for them, we do make sure that we play without proxies or things like that.
It depends on the deck that I'm playing. If I'm playing Najeela, I own every card in that deck because that's the main deck I put all of my real cards in.
Yeah.
My only deck. For most of the other decks that I play, like Selvala or any of the budget brews decks, I own most of the cards, but I just can't be bothered to switch them around into decks. So most of the time they are proxies, but they're of cards that I already own. I'm just very lazy.
Hucka queries, is there a maximum amount of question an individual may ask?
There is, but I can't tell you what the maximum is, so you better make them good.
23.
No, but there is a minimum.
You're definitely pushing it.
No more for you.
Hucka asks, what are the odds of a crossover episode with the other competitive EDH channels, LabMans, TT3, etc.?
I think the chances are really high.
I'd say a solid 83%.
We've been talking to a few of the people. In fact, if you are on our Discord, Cameron from the Lab Maniacs comes and visits every once in a while, as well as Pongo from Team Turn 3. Pongo's from Canada, and so are we. So it's a little bit easier for us to get to a place where we can collaborate with him, as well as the folks from the Into the North podcast. They're from Toronto. It's probably more likely that we'll be able to collaborate with them unless we're somehow able to meet up at a GP somewhere. But we're also exploring the possibility of having a remote game with somebody. Having either 2 or 3 of us, the Spike Feeders, in our studio here, having a 4th person or a 3rd and 4th person playing the game remotely, like you would see on the Play EDH Discord server. So we would be playing the game with them remotely, and then we would splice in their video in post-production.
I know we've, as the Spike Feeders, have talked about it, and we're very, very interested in reaching out and working together, collaborating. Now, we're currently limited by geographical location, finding a way to work around that. If you want to work together with us, hit us up, let us know.
We actually have a couple more special guest episodes and crossover episodes in the works for some time down the road. I don't know if there's a date set on those yet, but keep an eye out.
Probably pretty high. You know, they're all cool people. I'd like to think we're cool people. I'd like to think they think we're cool people.
Hucka wonders, why wasn't it snowing in the Christmas episode?
It absolutely was snowing in the Christmas episode, but we were inside.
Because we're inside.
Because we were playing inside.
Because the windows were closed.
How do you know it wasn't snowing?
Hucka asks, thoughts on Keyforge?
Never played it, but it sounds like it could be fun.
Seems cool, but Magic takes too much of my time. Probably not for me.
It seems actually kind of sweet. The last time I was legitimately interested, everything was sold out, so I couldn't buy into it, but I would probably try it out.
I haven't played Keyforge, but I actually really want to. Heard a lot of great things about it. I am absolutely open to learning it and might even learn it sometime within a couple weeks from when this Q&A episode airs.
I actually think Keyforge is pretty fantastic. It is a fun, quick, easy game to get into. If you've played any sort of Magic at all, or even Hearthstone, it's super quick to pick up. I like to call it a great second game. I'm not going to quit Magic and start playing Keyforge professionally, but it's a great game to introduce people who maybe don't want to jump into Magic and they just want something a little bit easier. It's also very easy to get into because you buy one deck and that's it. You don't have to keep buying, you don't sink $400 into a single card. It's very grab and go, which I really like.
Hucka asks, what does your family think of the Spike Feeders? Are they supportive, or do they ask, what kind of stupid thing is that?
My parents don't know a ton about Magic, but they're always very, very supportive. They want me to keep doing this as long as I'm enjoying it. My brother is actually one of our viewers. He comments on a couple of our videos. My fiance has been fantastically supportive throughout the whole thing, filming late, missing out on random dinners with her family that I forgot we had. Even though she doesn't understand Magic, all of my family and even her family has been super supportive about this channel.
My parents and Bill's parents were one of our first patrons, so that was kind of exciting. I know that they actually watch our videos, so hi Mom, hi Dad. And they show them to their friends occasionally. I know that they don't understand the ins and outs of what we're doing because they don't know how to play the game, but they've been extremely supportive. And I mentioned in the last episode, my girlfriend has actually been very supportive of this as well.
I have family who actually plays Magic, and I didn't tell them about the channel, but they found it randomly, and they're like, hey, you're on YouTube. And I'm like, yeah. And the rest of them don't know, so I don't know. They'd probably think it's stupid.
My girlfriend thinks it's cool. My mom thinks it's cool. I don't think anybody else in my family understands it, and they don't matter.
Doesn't your aunt watch us?
Sure.
Empire Scum asks, when will Jim stop being the lone control / stax player?
Never.
Well, I have some lists I want to play that might slow it down a little.
I've been trying to drag people over to the dark side. Everybody likes combos though. It's like when you play a MOBA and everybody wants to play assassins and nobody wants to be a tank or a support. This is exactly what happens. This is exactly what happens.
Prior to us starting the channel, I actually also played a lot of stax and control, and it was great in our meta. We found overall it increased both my and Jim's win percentage in games quite a lot, but the flip side to that is while our games were fun and interactive and great, they're taking on average 2 to 3 hours, which doesn't make for a great viewing experience. I've been tweaking some of my control decks so it's more reactive control with a little bit of combo and less stacks.
It's not so bad. Most of us are on more mid-rangey plans anyway, but when anybody else plays a second control deck, especially Jan, our games end up being like 3 hours long and unusable. It's rough. It's rough.
Everest L asks, I'm curious as to if some of the group has played other card games. Whenever I teach Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon players, that is their go-to word to understand triggered abilities.
Well, way back when I was a young lad, we played this great card game called Yu-Gi-Oh! And man, was it awful. I've dabbled in Pokemon, a lot of Hearthstone and plenty like 14 and stuff when it was cool.
Yeah, I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was a wee lad, so I don't know if I got it from there and carried it over. I've been saying no effects for as long as I can remember.
Elliot and I both started in Yu-Gi-Oh! Back when we were tiny babies in the early high school. We burned out on that very quickly because of the massive culture of power creep. Buying into decks was so volatile because of reprints happening, turning $100 cards into 5-cent cards, and didn't really want that. The community was also just kind of not great, so we decided to swap over to Magic and haven't regretted the decision.
I've played quite a few different card games. I play board games with a group of people fairly regularly, and card games often come up. I would say I probably use a lot of Magic terminology in the other card games rather than the other way around. I think we just use it because it's kind of a catch-all, right? I mean, if you say no responses or no effects, if you say no responses, it's something that you're actively doing or actively not doing. So you're saying, I'm not going to act here. But when you say no effects, it kind of gives a different connotation of, I have nothing that I want to do actively, and I also don't have anything passive that I need to acknowledge at this time.
As of right now, Magic and I guess Keyforge are the only card games that I actively play, but in the past I have played Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, Legend of the Five Rings. I've tried Netrunner out, Hearthstone. I just love gaming in general. It takes up a significant portion of my time, as well as Magic. Magic is the primary one that I go with.
High in the Ground 08 asks, Thalia hate bears?
I love both of these things. I'm not really sure what you're asking, but yes.
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 Yep.
Frederico asks, do you see cEDH as a combo control format and EDH as an aggro-control format? Can an aggro deck compete in cEDH's format?
No. You can absolutely have aggro in cEDH, you just lose. You should absolutely have combo in EDH, because games have to end. I used to run a Thalia aggro deck, and I didn't win a lot.
Typically, the aggro strategy is preying on the more mid-range side of the format, where they're trying to do things on turn 5 and 6, so you're like planning to kill them around there.
Combo control works really well in cEDH because it tends to be a lot quicker, whereas with regular EDH, people are trying to do the biggest, flashiest, excitingest thing they can do, which tends to skew your mana curve up to like 6, 7, 8 mana.
I think that there's actually a lot of combo in non-cEDH EDH. I think that there's a pretty large group of people that wouldn't consider themselves cEDH players that love playing combo. I think combo is one of the weirdest things that you can do in Magic, and I think people are often drawn to EDH because you're allowed to do weird things. I think I would call cEDH a control combo format if you consider stax to be control, as in a passive control strategy rather than an active control strategy. Obviously the format is dominated by combo, or rather cEDH is dominated by combo. And then there are a few stax decks or a few control decks that tend to keep those combo decks in check. And then there's a whole middle ground of mid-range decks that are sort of a combination between the two.
Max asks, how old are you guys?
I am 25.
I am 23, maybe 24 at the time of this airing, but I'm 23 at the time of us filming this, no spoilers.
I'm 32. I am the oldest spike feeder, and it shows. I don't know how to use Instagram. I barely know how to use Twitter. I am very, very new to Discord, although I do know how to use emoticons, or emojis, as they call them. And that's, yeah.
Emojis.
My name is Jim. I am the oldest. I don't do socials. I'm 32. Oh God. Bill's gonna edit that in. This is gonna be bad.
Depending on when you're watching this, I'm 31. I'm the second oldest member of Spike Feeders. I also don't understand how Instagram works. I talked to someone whose primary form of communication was Snapchat, and it blew my mind. So the most important thing to note is because I am the second oldest, I still have a landline.
I have the proud distinction of being the youngest spike feeder at 23 years of age, turning 24 in 2019.
Max asks, what other types of content are you exploring? Any plans to make deck tech videos or combo explanation videos, articles, podcasts, new card discussion videos?
Before I started working on this Spike Feeders content, I was writing articles on themanabase.com for approximately 2 years. And it's something that I would love to continue doing. I definitely don't have time to write articles right now in between editing these videos. Most of the effort involved in making these videos is in the editing. It is between 20 and 40, sometimes as much as 50 hours per video. We've got a deck tech pilot episode that we're currently editing but haven't aired yet. And that's kind of serving as our technical functional test for a podcast as well.
I definitely think we're looking to diversify our content. Articles, probably not, but definitely keep an eye out for different video content.
We've actually been talking about branching out into most of those things, starting with things like deck tech videos, the combo explanation videos, and the podcasts. Be sure to let us know what you'd like to see from us so that we can better focus our energy on the content that our fans are after.
Brooks Northcutt asks, what other filler cards should I add to get my Exodia pieces quicker? Pot of Greed, Pot of Greed, Pot of Greed, Pot of Greed, Pot of Greed.
If you run Pot of Greed, you can draw 2 additional cards and end your turn.
Pot of Greed.
Pot of Greed and a Jar of Erebus. Pretty much any container of deadly sin that you can functionally convert into card draw that has a face on it.
Magical Mallet, Reload, and stall cards like Battle Fader probably would help you out a lot.
Cantrips, tutors, counter spells.
Zach asks, what is your favorite fringe cEDH deck that is almost good enough?
Anything James plays.
Most of the ones that are played in our meta.
Everything original that you see on our show.
Bears in cars.
I would say this Bears and Cars deck, I talk about it so much, but it's so fun. I would say it's probably not good enough, but it is definitely close enough to good enough that you wouldn't be embarrassed to sit down at a table with it. There's a few other decks that I really like. I've been looking at Anafenza, and I know Anafenza was kind of gaining in popularity recently until this new Double Titan Gitrog line. And I know that's pretty effective against Anafenza for anybody that actually understands how to do it. But I would say those are probably the 2 that I would look at. I really like Anafenza a lot. If only for the fact that she's a 3-drop 4/4 that blocks Najila.
My Mishra deck, I'm still working on it. I'm not going to give up. Try to keep tweaking it until I get to a point where it feels as powerful as I think it can be.
Dom asks, what sets did you all respectively start playing Magic?
The first ever time I started playing Magic was Theros. I bought one of those like starter deck kits that you get a basic deck and like 2 boosters with.
I started playing in Theros block. Precisely when it started, in fact, when Theros was released.
I started playing in Tempest, and I proceeded to play all the way to the end of high school.
I sort of started with Magic 2012, but I really started getting into Magic around Innistrad. I had this really nice werewolves, like quasi-standard deck.
I started a couple times because I stopped a couple times. The first time I started was in Revised. I played up until about Exodus, and then I took a long hiatus. I basically stopped playing Magic, and then came back when Bill made the switch from Yu-Gi-Oh to Magic, right around Scars of Mirrodin. So he might say a different set, but I'm pretty sure it was around Scars of Mirrodin that I came back, and then I've been back ever since.
Brandon Mayberry asks, if you could build a deck without having the constraints of your commander's color identity, cEDH variable or not, what would you be brewing?
Something with Kiki Jiki, and then no other red cards.
I'd for sure make anything 5 color at least, because I'm greedy and I don't care about my mana bases getting blood mooned.
I think I would probably just add white to my Nin deck because I love what white brings. I might even go 4 color and add white and black, but I would love to be able to play Enlightened Tutor, and I would love to be able to play Jeskai Ascendancy and probably Rest in Peace. Those 3 pieces I think would fit really well in my existing Nin deck, and I don't think I would have to make too many other changes.
I really just want to play Angel's Grace in my Yidris deck. There's not even many other white spells I want to run. Just being able to play Angel's Grace would be great.
Steve Boyle asks, are there any cards that get played in cEDH that you guys find overrated?
I think anything that costs 4 mana or more that people say is good. It's basically all overrated at that point because you can just have interaction that's so much lower.
I would say probably Thrasios, and don't get me wrong here, I am fully willing to admit that Thrasios is objectively better than most things you could probably run in the command zone. I think a lot of people look at Thrasios as more of a, why would you play anything but Thrasios? And I think that that's really negative. It doesn't encourage critical thinking. It doesn't encourage people to ask, why am I playing this card and not this card? With a huge asterisk, and that's, it's probably as good as people say it is, but I think people should think a little bit harder about why they're playing it.
I think people are putting too much emphasis on Flash Hull. People just started jamming it into whatever deck that is running green and blue.
I think the forbidden tutors, like Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, are pretty overrated. They're good, like, don't get me wrong, but you lose a lot more of the time with Demonic Consultation than you'd think. By just whether the card that you name is in your top 6 or whether you exile it along the way, or all your win conditions along the way.
I think the Forbidden Tutors are maybe a little overrated. I'm not comfortable with that sort of like super all-in glass cannon strategy that they sort of exemplify. I've never really had a spot for them in a deck. I can see why they're useful, especially in something like Food Chain Tazari, where it can exile your Mist Hollow Griffin and Squee the Immortal so that it actually helps you along towards your plan more, but I don't really like them. I also think partners are overrated, so there's that.
Edward Bjorgum asks, will we see a Vannifar deck once Ravnica Allegiance is out? Thoughts on her viability?
I am probably the only one of the mindset that I think she's too slow as a creature. I think it'll be Fringe. We'll put it as a Fringe commander that's almost playable.
I think she's very viable. It's kind of tough. You see a lot of people trying to jam Hulk lines in there. Simic Hulk lines are not great. But Birthing Pod is extremely powerful. Bill is probably the most likely one to put it together.
A couple of the guys on our Discord and I have actually been sort of putting together a list. So I would probably just as a service to them put it together so that I can play it on cam.
Viability, I think, is yet to be seen. I'm a little down on the idea that because she's a creature, she doesn't have haste, which means unless you are playing haste enablers like Concordant Crossroads, your opponents have a full turn cycle to deal with it before you have an opportunity to activate it. I think it still will be a powerful commander. Like Simic has some really cool things it can do, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
If nobody else builds her, I might.
DR asks, what cards seem like they are on the cusp of being good enough for cEDH? Can Boros deck actually be competitive in the meta? What are your thoughts on partner, and should Wizards of the Coast print more?
As a general specifically, I'd probably say Derevi. It used to be real good, then the Mulligans hit it, and now it's still there, but it's so close.
I love Jeskai Ascendancy so much, but I think it's really tough to build around given the existing commanders. Just because in Jeskai it's not particularly easy to get it into play reliably. Once you get it into play, you have several steps that have to kind of go right for it to be good. The other one that I've been thinking about lately is Metalworker. And I say this because it's on the cusp in my Nin deck, and I'm probably cutting it in the next update that I make to the deck. I find I want to get it out on turn 1 or turn 2 so that it can make the biggest impact it can make in the game. But in doing so, I'm discarding the artifacts that I would reveal to it when I activate its ability. Because I can like rush it out by casting 2 or 3 artifacts on turn 1 or turn 2. Then by the time I have it out, I have 1 artifact in my hand and it taps for 2, which is not particularly good. And the flip side of that is if I draw it in the late game, I'm generally not sandbagging artifacts in my hand in hopes that I will get Metalworker out.
I think that Carador is actually, as a commander, he used to be really, really strong back when Boonweaver was a popular deck type. Now that Protean Hulk got unbanned and there's no reason to really run Boonweaver anymore, I feel like the strong, inevitable graveyard-based strategy can still exist in some way, but it's just so weak to graveyard interaction. So if there was a way to protect your graveyard more consistently in those colors in Abzan, I feel like that strategy could be really, really strong.
Yuriko, the Tiger's Shadow. It's so close to being Edric enough, yet just far enough away.
I think that Possibility Storm is one of those cards that feels like it should be good enough. If it came down a turn earlier, it would disrupt more things. If it was 1 red instead of 2, you could power it out quicker. There's just so many things about the card where if it was just a little bit faster or a little bit this, it would be fantastic. The other one, which saddens me it's not good enough, is Chalice of the Void. It feels like it should be because it gives you the ability to tailor a stax piece to what you're facing, but because of how things have gotten so varied, it is purely a proactive card, and you have to make that decision immediately. Like, it's one of those cards that's surprisingly difficult to break parity on, and it's surprisingly difficult to time correctly.
I think the closest to a competitive Boros deck that I've seen is James's Anax and Cymede deck, just because of the sheer amount of damage it throws out and how quickly it does that. It's a really effective way to pressure ad nauseum decks and other decks that rely on their life total as a resource. So that's really their axis of interaction. The Boros counterspell, as it were, is to kill your opponent before they can do anything relevant. So I would say not right now, but maybe.
There's just nothing Boros can do that outpaces Flash Hulk or stops any of the Stax decks from really, well, staxing them out. The problem is you don't have a commander that really gives you the card advantage you'd want in a Stax deck, or is a viable win con as a Stax deck.
They don't have a lot of the same tools that the rest of the color pie has, especially in multiplayer formats. It's really hard to deal 120 damage, which is what Boros decks are typically trying to do. But, you know, if you really like the strategy, I wouldn't give up.
Season 1, Episode 6, all it takes is the ability to draw 90 cards.
I hate partners. I think that they were a mistake. I think all of them are very boring, and then Thrasios and Tymna are way more powerful than the remainder of them. They enable really dull deck construction. They're just not very interesting as cards in general. I would say they should not print anymore and actually retroactively not print the ones they already have.
To specifically screw with Bill, I think partners are fantastic.
I think Partner was a very interesting idea. It gave a lot of creative freedom for people to build decks. We kind of went from a spot where we had no 4-color commanders to them saying, well, you'll be getting 4 of them because we're making 4-color commander decks, which was fantastic. And then when they came out, it was kind of like, oh, and then we've also added this partner commander. So realistically, you now have 100 different partner commanders you can play, or 100 different combinations of decks you can play. And that was great, and it was awesome, and it was exciting to brew with. But when we got to the end of the day, there's really only a handful that are viable. Do I think they should print more? I don't think they should. I think printing them in a way that is healthy for the game and makes sense is going to be exceptionally difficult.
I think partner is kind of cool. I think we probably ended up with the situation that we're in right now because all of the different permutations of partners are probably very difficult to test. If you were to print new partners, it would make it even more difficult to test because you would have to test them in every single combination with the old partners to make sure that you're not accidentally opening up something busted. I think if they were to print more, it's probably setting themselves up for something unintentionally disastrous. There are not a whole lot of options for true 4-color single commanders, so the partners enable me to do that quite a bit. I love the ability to do that, but I'm not confident in the people who design the commanders in their ability to print things that are fair and balanced.
I think it's great for the coverage that we got color-wise, and I definitely think they should print more because there's some lacking keywords and features on the current sets.
Hey, thanks for checking out the Spike Feeders on YouTube. If you like this content and you want to see more, make sure you click subscribe. If you love this content, click on the link to our Patreon. Every dollar helps us create more videos like this.